Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz says that he believes that his relationship with Donald Trump is as good as ever, even after getting harshly criticized by the U.S. president. On Tuesday, Trump lashed out at Merz for criticizing his leadership of the war with Iran. The U.S. president has also repeatedly lambasted UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer for his refusal to fully back the war. It's all helped bring relations between the United States and Europe to a low point. Britain's King Charles is currently in the United States on a trip widely seen as a mission to rescue UK ties with Washington.
Rarely has a royal visit attracted so much attention and had so much riding on it diplomatically. King Charles and Queen Camilla are on a charm offensive, with Donald Trump responding in kind.
Americans have had no closer friends than the British. We share that same root. We speak the same language. We hold the same values.
Addressing a joint session of Congress, a rare honour for state visitors, Charles extolled the long-standing ties between the two nations. But he also warned of the need for checks and balances on executive power, something Trump's critics have accused him of undermining. And he praised NATO. He got repeated standing ovations. But a short while later, Donald Trump took to his Truth Social platform and lashed out at the Chancellor of Germany, saying, quote, he thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, something Friedrich Merz never said. He finished by saying it's no wonder Germany is doing so poorly economically and otherwise. The German leader has prided himself on having good relations with Trump, where other European leaders have struggled. He's visited the White House twice in less than a year. But on Monday, he was unusually blunt in his criticism, calling the Iran war ill-considered.
The Americans clearly have no strategy. And the problem with conflicts like this is always that you don't just have to go in, you also have to get out.
Today, the Chancellor sought to downplay the spat, insisting relations remain, quote, as good as ever.
We are still having good discussions with one another. The foreign minister just returned from New York this morning and reported on a wide range of discussions there, including with the US government. So, to put it in Anglo-American terms, we are
in good speaking terms.
Europe is in damage control mode. But how long will it last? Last week, French President Emmanuel Macron said Donald Trump is, quote, dead against Europe. He compared him to the presidents of Russia and China. Transatlantic relations are likely to remain rocky, despite some of the positive mood music in Washington.
To the United States and the United Kingdom, God bless both our countries.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And let's bring in now Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff, director of the German Council on Foreign Relations and the former president of the German Marshall Fund. He's joining us from Berlin. Thank you so much for your time. I'd like to begin first with this, this developing row between the German Chancellor and Donald Trump, and begin, first of all, with what Trump said. He said that the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz thinks it's okay, and I'm quoting here, Friedrich Merz thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That's not the case, is it?
Of course not. He never was compliant with the idea that Iran should have a bomb. That's why the Europeans were in part of the JCPOA negotiation to prevent that. Just that. That is what Merz always believed. That he doesn't agree with the method that Trump is now using doesn't mean that he is ignorant of the fact that a nuclear weapon in Iran's regime's hand is a danger.
Okay, so that's what Trump said for his part. Now I'd like to look at what Friedrich Merz said earlier in the week, and I'm quoting him here. He said, an entire nation, which is referring to the United States, is being humiliated by the Iranian leadership. He also said that the Americans, quote, obviously have no strategy. Were you surprised to hear Merz be so critical of Trump and the U.S. war on Iran?
Yes, I was. because Merz has invested so much into his relationship with Donald Trump, and for very good reasons. We in this country elected a leader to buy time and use this time carefully, which means to buy hard power and do not disrupt relations with the United States, even if led with a controversial figure like Donald Trump in the meantime, and then see where we come out when Germany itself, in its partnership with Europe, becomes stronger, has more hard power, and then see where this relationship goes. But this means that you have to be on speaking terms, that you have to have a good relationship with Donald Trump. Trump has done that in the past. It is unclear to me why he would want to be sort of the nation's chief analyst. It is better to save your friction with Donald Trump for real issues where you have to have a dissent. I would say Greenland was one of them, trade may be another one. There's no decision point here in Iran, so therefore I was surprised.
Okay, so it sounds like from what you're saying there, and I'm reading between the lines, like this was a mistake on the part of Merz. And he's now coming out, I mean, he's trying to walk it back and he's trying to downplay it. He says that relations remain as good as before. Is he right?
Well, I just come back from Washington, and on Capitol Hill, as in the White House, as in the political community there, it's not just the focus on one sentence or another. What is being recognized is the enormous effort that Germany is making to spend more on defense and change the picture of defense in Europe. So that is the key of the relationship right now, and how people in Washington see it. So it's not just a one-sided picture that this relationship is sort of in a downward slope. You couldn't say that.
And the American companies are, of course, benefiting significantly from those orders that are coming in, you know, as the Europeans up their spending on defense. Can you just walk us through? Because I mean, you know, you've been doing this for decades. Analyzing the transatlantic relationship. Tell us a little bit more about where you see things right now, this point in time specifically.
Obviously, this is a very difficult time for the transatlantic relationship as it pertains to all European countries and the United States. The Americans are taking a course in which there's more indifference, in some elements even contempt for Europe. I've asked that question in the White House last week. Where does this come from? And it's very hard to deal with it when even territorial integrity is being questioned with regard to two NATO member states, Canada and Denmark. So dealing with that type of disruption where you don't exactly know where NATO stands, how credible the NATO deterrent is a very difficult moment for Europe. But most European countries are adapting a strategy of accepting America's refocusing of its foreign policy and turning it into acquiring more hard power, more agency, and then seeing where that relationship with the United States goes.
And what would be your advice to European leaders right now? Because on the one hand, you do have, I mean, as you're articulating there, Europe is striving to become more independent in the defense sphere. But ultimately, the United States is still primarily seen as you know, the biggest guarantor of European security. What would be your advice through that lens for European leaders in how to approach Trump? Because there has also, especially in the past year, been a lot of criticism of a so-called policy of appeasement.
I see three strategies globally of how countries deal with Donald Trump. There's the Japanese version, doubling down on the United States, being more indispensable, because of a lack of alternatives. There's the Canadian version through Prime Minister Carney, who is on course to spinning off and saying we need to counterbalance the United States with the power of middle powers. And there's the European strategy of buying hard power and buying time. That is a difficult one because you have 7 different nations, 27 different leaders, and 27 different tones. So what I would suggest to them is keep your calm and save your critique and your maybe even anger for Donald Trump for the real issues. When there is a threat to territorial integrity, then it is called for to oppose Donald Trump, but don't do it on occasions that are really just about opinions. So there is going to be elements of friction, but you need to be careful with them. There is, of course, a problem that you will have with people like Mark Rutte, who is seen as an appeaser by most even in his own country, in the Netherlands. It's a question of how far you will have to go with that. He certainly plays a role because he has probably a very good relationship with Trump. That's something to be valued, although it's sometimes hard to, as a European, to follow Mr. Rutte's tone and approach.
Thank you so much, Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff. We appreciate your time today and for joining us here on DW News.
Thank you.
Well, my next guest has spent years analyzing the political strategy of Germany and Europe. Rachel Tausendfreund is Senior Research Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Rachel, it's good to have you with us. I know you've written extensively about Germany's political leadership in times of crisis. What did you hear in Chancellor Merz's comments this week? Did you hear a sound strategy or did you hear a strategic mistake?
I think it's both. The word choice, I would call a strategic mistake. Humiliated is a pretty strong word, and it's a word that's guaranteed to trigger Donald Trump. But there's also a strategy there that you're seeing more and more Europeans take, which is to be a little less fawning, a little less compliant, and push back a little bit more against Donald Trump. And that part is strategic, and I think it's also smart.
The German Chancellor, he didn't just criticize policy. He also questioned whether the United States is projecting strength at all. I know this view may not be mainstream here in political Berlin, but is it way out on the margins?
No, it's not at all out on the margins. It's it's a pretty broad consensus really here in Berlin that vis-a-vis Iran, at least in this conflict, it may have looked a little different the first 5 or 10 days of the conflict, but now Merz is not wrong. The U.S. is not looking strong in this. The off-ramp is not clear, and it's not at all clear that this is going to look like any kind of victory for Israel and the United States, and that's not strong.
We know that President Trump's response to the words of the German Chancellor, the response was immediate and personal. What does that escalation tell you about how fragile, or maybe I should say how transactional, this relationship has become?
By Trump's standards, I would say his response, it wasn't that bad. I mean, he basically said Merz doesn't know what he's talking about. That was the personal part. And then he, mentioned that this is maybe why Germany's not doing well. So it could have been worse. And I think that it's actually true what Merz said. By all indications, the bilateral relationship is still relatively cordial, relatively strong. As I said at the beginning, I think it's actually a better strategy to occasionally push back a little for Merz. And so I'm not confident that this is going to be a real problem in the relationship. That said, obviously, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz and the pressure this puts on Europeans and other U.S. allies is not going to make things easy.
Let's talk about for a moment of the image of the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. I mean, he's trying to position himself as a strong Atlanticist. Does this public clash, does it strengthen that image domestically or does it undermine it?
I think it strengthens his position as an Atlanticist in the sense of with the German public, Donald Trump is very, very unpopular. And so actually, if Merz wants to position himself as an Atlanticist and make the case that Germany should still, work closely with the United States, maybe even rely a little bit on the United States, it's better then if he shows also some strength. Right? If he's seen as being too weak in the relationship with the United States, that actually doesn't help the Atlanticist case. So it's a better strategy.
Do you see a pattern here where you've got Europe calling for strategy and restraint, you've got Washington moving faster, more aggressively? Is this now a structural divergence rather than just a temporary disagreement that we're looking at?
There's definitely a divergence between, Europe's interests and needs and those of the Trump administration, and that's been clear from the very beginning, starting with Ukraine. Now, the Trump administration has supported Ukraine more than the worst expectations were, right? They are continuing to provide military intelligence and to send supplies that are bought by the Europeans, or at least up until now they have been, but there are some crunches coming there. And indeed, a lot of the kind of global trade stability that Europe would want, that Germany would want, is being endangered by the rather aggressive Trump policies, and one could argue also the policies where it's not clear what the outcome is going to be.
Rachel Tausendfreund, good to have you on. It's good to get your valuable insights into this transatlantic spat. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.